House resumes, and I have to report that the bill shortly entitled the 2020-2021 Appropriation Act 2020 passed through the committee stage without any amendments. The question is that the report of the committee on the bill be adopted. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the bill shortly entitled Appropriation 2020-2021 Appropriation Act 2020 be read a third time and passed accordingly.
Seconded, Mr. Speaker.
It has been moved and seconded that the bill shortly entitled the 2020-2021 Appropriation Act 2020 be read a third time and passed. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
2020-2021 Appropriation 2020.
The bill has been read a third time and passed accordingly.
Mr. Speaker, whereas by virtue of Section 3.1 of the Loans Act, Chapter 64.5 of the 1990 Revised Law of the Commonwealth of Dominica, the House of Assembly may by resolution duly passed authorize the minister responsible for finance to borrow money from approved sources or guarantee loans to statutory boards or public corporations for the purpose of financing general development purposes or for other purposes. And whereas, in accordance with Section 36(1) of the Finance Administration Act No. 4 of 1994, the power conferred by the Loans Act to borrow money by means of advances from a bank may be exercised by means of a fluctuating overdraft. And whereas a sum not exceeding 56,500,000 Eastern Caribbean dollars is required to meet central government's current overdraft requirements, and a sum not exceeding 5 million Eastern Caribbean dollars is required to meet guarantee of overdrafts to statutory boards and public corporations. Be it resolved that in accordance with Section 3.1 of the Loans Act, Chapter 64.5 of the 1990 Revised Laws of the Commonwealth of Dominica, this Honorable House authorizes the Minister for Finance to borrow and guarantee by means of fluctuating overdraft a sum not exceeding in the aggregate 61,500,000 Eastern Caribbean dollars from First Caribbean International Bank, National Bank of Dominica, Royal Bank of Canada, and or any other approved financial institution to meet central government's current overdraft requirements and to guarantee overdrafts to statutory and public corporations for a further period of 1 year commencing from 1st day of July 2020.
Seconded, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, the resolution before this Honorable House seeks Parliament's approval for the use of a fluctuating overdraft to meet government's short-term financing needs for the fiscal year 2020-2021. Section 36(1) of the Finance Administration Act No. 4 of 1994 specifies that the Minister for Finance may borrow by means of a fluctuating overdraft to finance government operations. Mr. Speaker, As it is customary, government utilizes a combination of financing options to meet short-term cash flow requirements. One such option is the use of overdraft facilities. The motion before this House seeks Parliament's approval to enter agreements with commercial banks in the Commonwealth of Dominica for the use of overdraft facilities totaling $61.5 million. This amount comprises the sum of $56.5 million on behalf of central government and $5 million to guarantee loans or overdrafts for statutory boards and public corporations. Mr. Speaker, we live in an environment where emergency situations arise from time to time, as was experienced with Tropical Storm Erica, Hurricane Maria, and the one that was least expected, the COVID-19 pandemic. Government must therefore have access to emergency resources to meet unexpected commitments. Notwithstanding the financing gap forecasted in this year's budget estimates as a result of the current pandemic, the overdraft amounts that are being requested are equivalent to the amount which was approved for the last fiscal year. This is because government has taken steps to further rationalize recurrent expenditure, as you would have seen with this year's budget. We have taken action to encourage investment in order to grow the economy faster than what is currently being projected by the IMF and others. Also, Mr. Speaker, overdraft facilities are not government's preferred method of financing. While these facilities are easily accessible, they are also very expensive. Therefore, exceeding the limit is really a last resort which would emanate from the negative impact of emergency situations on revenue or expenditure or delays in receiving expected funds. That is why we have converted part of the overdraft facility at the National Bank to a 4% loan. This matter will be presented to the House during this sitting. We have also received budget support offers from some of our partners on concessional terms and are putting systems in place to access these funds. Approval is therefore being requested for government to borrow a sum not exceeding $61.5 million EC dollars from the First Caribbean International Bank, from the National Bank of Dominica, from the Royal Bank of Canada, and or any other approved financial institution to meet central government's current overdraft requirements and to guarantee overdrafts to statutory and public corporations for a further period of 1 year commencing the first day of July 2020. I commend this motion to this Honorable House for its approval. Thank you.
The motion is before the House for debate. Yes, I recognize the Leader of Opposition.
Thank you.
Sit.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in the important trust of treating and considering the matter of an overdraft facility for the operations of central government for the fiscal year 2020-2021. I pledge to do so in a just and faithful manner that will promote the honor and glory of Almighty God and advance the good of the interest that He has committed to our charge in this honorable House. Mr. Speaker, overdraft authorization is not a contentious matter in this House. The past couple of years in this Honorable House, I've sat here and listened to the recitation and voted for the overdraft facility. This year is a little different because I have a few observations to make about this overdraft request, the circumstances in which it emerges, and some lessons I think this Parliament needs to learn. On Tuesday, the 31st of July, 2018, on a motion by the then Minister for Ecclesiastic Affairs, Family and Gender Affairs, Ms. Catherine Daniel, seconded by the Minister for Trade and Energy, Mr. Ian Douglas, this Honorable House authorized the Finance Minister to borrow by means of fluctuating overdraft a sum not exceeding $36.5 million from First Caribbean International, National Bank, Royal Bank of Canada, and any other approved financial institution that was to meet central government's current overdraft requirements of $31.5 million for central government operations, and to guarantee $5 million in overdrafts to statutory corporations and public bodies for the financial year July 1st, 2018 to June 30th, 2019. Mr. Speaker, Section 3.1 of the Loans Act, Chapter 6504 of the 1990 Revised Laws of the Commonwealth of Dominica, allows the House of Assembly by resolution duly passed to authorize the minister responsible for finance to borrow money for approved purposes or to guarantee loans to statutory boards and public corporations. So Section 3.2 of that Act, Mr. Speaker, provides that any sums borrowed or guaranteed under this Act, the Loans Act, shall be appropriated by the Financial Secretary to the purposes for which these sums were borrowed or guaranteed, and a statement of the sums. A statement of the sums so borrowed and appropriated shall be laid before the House of Assembly at the first sitting thereafter. Mr. Speaker, at the close of the financial year, June 30th, 2019, government's overdraft at the NBD, the National Bank of Dominica, was $140,039,191. $141,039,191 million. That was $103 million. $103,539,191 above the legal limit of $36.5 million authorized by Parliament. In other words, for the year 2018-2019, government borrowed $103,539,191 through a fluctuating overdraft at NBD without the approval of Parliament as required by law. And contrary to law, there was no statement of the sums borrowed and appropriated laid before the House of Assembly at the first sitting after such borrowings or at all. So we come now to the 2nd of August, 2019. The overdraft balance coming into the start of that financial year is $140,039,191. And on a motion by the then Minister for the Environment, Climate Resilience, Disaster Management and Urban Renewal, Mr. Joseph Isaac, seconded by the Minister for Trade, Energy and Employment, Mr. Ian Douglas, this Honorable House authorized the Minister of Finance to borrow and guarantee by means of fluctuating overdraft a sum not exceeding $61.5 million from First Caribbean International, National Bank, Royal Bank of Canada, and any other approved financial institution. And that, of course, as we know it so well now, is to meet the central government's current overdraft requirements. $56 million, $56.5 million. It was increased by $25 million from the previous year. And the amount for the guarantee of overdraft to statutory corporations and so on remained at $5 million. Total of $61.5 million. The mover of the motion told this Parliament, and I quote, "The overdraft facility is not intended to serve as a permanent source of financing, but rather as a bridging facility to meet short-term needs which may arise as a result of unanticipated shortfalls in revenue or increased demands on the state due to unexpected events." End of quote. And the Prime Minister, in debate on the motion, gave this Parliament the assurance that the overdraft facility would be used prudently. He said, and I quote, "The commitment I give to this Parliament, as I have always done, is to be very prudent with the use of overdraft, because overdraft in itself, as many of us who have had overdraft facilities in our private business and in our private capacities understands that it is very expensive. And it is always borrowing of extreme last resort. If you can do without it, stay away from it. If you cannot, then you have to be judicious and careful with its use." End of quote. Mr. Speaker, we heard similar sentiments today. And with the increase of the overdraft by $25 million from $26.5 million to $61.5 million, government entered the financial year with its overdraft at NBD at least $78,539,191 above the legal limit authorized by the Parliament. In the governance and public affairs, there can be no proper motive for failing or refusing to disclose to Parliament truth and fact about violations of the rule of law engaged to borrow money ostensibly for public purposes. At the time that the motion was moved for the authorization of the $61.5 million overdraft facility for government for 2019-2020, the Minister of Finance, the Minister of the Environment, Climate Resilience, Disaster Management, and Urban Renewal, and other members of the Cabinet of Ministers knew or ought to have known that the overdraft was already legally in excess of the $61.5 million they were asking approval for. It was already more than $140 million. But the matter was swept under the carpet, and Parliament was kept in the dark. At the close of the last financial year, 2019-2020, on the 30th of June 2020, the estimates before this Honorable House now put the government overdraft at $56 million on account of the fact that a $125 million non-performing portion of that overdraft was converted to a long-term debt. I think I heard some reference to that by the move of the motion, because the indication is that we're coming to it when we talk about the approval for the loan, or should I say the so-called loan from the National Bank. The evidence, Mr. Speaker, is clear that the government continued the illegal increase of overdraft facilities up to $181 million, $119.5 million above the legal limit before the bank, it would appear, was forced to pull the brakes towards the end of 2019. The illegal overrun of the overdraft was part of the funding arrangement for unbudgeted election year spending of $322 million in 2018-2019, which was reported to this Parliament on August 10th.
I just going to guide you there. You cannot make an inference that if there is an overdraft increase, that it's for election.
I say it was spending in the election year.
No, that's not what you said. But anyway, proceed, but just proceed with caution.
Speaker, for example, in that election year, 2019, we had unbudgeted spending of $19.8 million on the National Employment Program. We had unbudgeted spending of $32 million on the Rapid Response Social Recovery Agency. We had unbudgeted election year spending of $9.1 million on a withholding tax refund for the Dominica Strong Company. We had election year unbudgeted spending of $62.9 million on professional and consultancy services in the Ministry of Public Works. And we also had election year unbudgeted spending under that $322 million overspend of $104 million on river dredging by a foreign company. And Mr. Speaker, in the midst of all of this massive illegal overdraft spending, people around the country are still waiting, for state assistance to repair their homes or to build new homes post-Maria.
You keep insisting
Some people are still waiting.
Remember, you keep insisting on illegal. It is an improper motive, because someone listening who doesn't understand what is happening will get the impression that the government did something bad and they need to go to jail. So I would ask you...
You're saying that. You're saying the government did something bad.
No, but if you keep saying illegal spending of millions, it's sending a wrong signal. It's just wording, and how you do your wording.
Yeah, no, but Mr. Speaker, I would not know how else to word the fact that...
I don't want to get involved in the overdraft debate. Just continue. I'm just guiding.
Yeah, but Mr. Speaker, at the same time, we need to be clear, because if we're not clear, you're going to continue to interrupt me, and you're going to continue to insist that
okay,
I do this or
let me
that.
just
So
tell you.
Let me just be clear. Let me just be clear, Mr. Speaker. Let me just be clear. I have taken time in this Honorable House this afternoon to lay out the practice or the action of the government which is contrary to law. The law requires that the government must come to Parliament for approval of loans. The government came to the Parliament for approval of a loan by fluctuating overdraft of $36.5 million, and then drove the overdraft to $140 million without coming to Parliament. That's breaking the law. And I don't know what else to call it. Mr. Speaker, You have, with all of this overdraft spending in Marigot, the primary school is still on the tarpaulin. There is still no functioning health clinic. No air conditioning in the storage facility for drugs in the area that have to be stored below room temperature, and no refrigeration for stocks of insulin for the poor people of the area. In the midst of all of this overdraft spending, government failed to implement 67% of its capital projects budgeted for 2019-2020. Public Works implemented 27%, housing 33%, trade 4%, health 26%, education 6%, agriculture a little better, 63%. Mr. Speaker, the other question that is raised regarding this overdraft and regarding the counsel from the Minister of Finance that overdraft is expensive and you only use it if you really have to. Last resort, last resort. We have been told over the years that revenues from the Citizenship by Investment program in Dominica have played a critical role in funding the operations of government through the years.
13 more minutes, sir. Just guidance.
How many?
13.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. But we have learned that it is not all the money that is raised for Dominica from the Citizenship by Investment program that actually comes into the consolidated fund. So you have money coming onshore and you have money staying offshore, and it seems as though it is onshore we are struggling, while we have to go into all of these massive, expensive overdrafts, while we seem to have surplus money, good money, offshore, that we're not using to help us correct our financial problems in Dominica. They're doing work, but we have issues that they're not being used to address. Why should we be taking $180 million in overdraft from the bank when we have all of these hundreds of millions sitting down waiting to do special projects through a particular area of government? It was the Prime Minister who told us, Mr. Speaker, and I quote, in respect to the housing, there was a special dispensation, so it is not under the real estate. It is treated somewhat like the Economic Diversification Fund, so the fees applicable to the housing are fees applicable if you were to invest in the EDF, government's direct monetary option. The housing program is now the premier program. The housing program is doing better than the fund option. And Mr. Speaker, I want to remind this Honorable House in the context of this debate that Section 76 of the Constitution, the Supreme Law of Dominica, provides that all revenues or other monies raised or received by Dominica, not being revenues or other monies that are payable by or under any law for the time being enforced in Dominica into some other fund established for a specific purpose, shall be paid into and from a consolidated fund. And I also want to remind this Honorable House that the Financial Administration Act of 1994 defines public money as all revenues or other monies raised or received for the purpose of government, and be any monies or funds held, whether temporarily or otherwise, by any officer in his official capacity, either alone or jointly with any other person, whether or not that person is an officer. The Act provides in Section 7 that there shall be one revenue fund which shall be called the Consolidated Fund. This overdraft facility is part of that Consolidated Fund. But we have funds belonging to Dominica elsewhere outside of the Consolidated Fund, which I'm suggesting to the members of this Honorable House on the other side, can be used to help us with the financial difficulties that you're seeking to address with expensive, excessive overdraft facilities. The rule of law in Dominica provides for due consideration and parliamentary approval of revenue collection and expenditure authorization with full disclosure to the public on whose behalf these monies are collected and on whose behalf these monies are spent. I think sometimes we run away with the impression that it's a private business we're doing. The little overdraft we're taking for ourselves. So we don't have to tell nobody about it. We can do what we want with it. The overdraft fluctuates, but it fluctuates between zero and the limit that the Parliament establishes. The overdraft doesn't fluctuate between the limit and whatever else you think it should be or wherever it should end up. So, Mr. Speaker, these revenues from the Citizenship by Investment Program for housing, they are public funds, and there must be a way that these funds, which are not being held in the consolidated fund, can be brought into the consolidated fund to help with the difficult financial situation that the government claims it is experiencing, why the extensive, expensive overdraft facilities have become necessary. We also say there is no law that requires such revenues to be paid into some other fund established for a specific purpose, and accordingly, the exception which is provided at Section 76 of the Constitution and Section 8 of the Finance Administration Act does not apply. The CBI housing funds belong to the people of Dominica and must be received into and disbursed from the consolidated fund. For perspective, I want to quote the Prime Minister again from August of 2019. Every one of these houses that we are building under the CBI program belongs to the state, 100%. So this is state asset. So otherwise, if we did not have the housing, or if we did not go with the housing program the way that we went, all of those revenues would go into the state and would therefore form part of the estimates or the public sector investment program. Had we included this in the estimates, the budget would not have been $1 billion. It would be about $2.2 billion. $2.2 billion minus $1 billion is equal to $1.2 billion. That is the August 2019 estimate from the Finance Minister of revenues collected for the state for public purpose that did not go into the consolidated fund. We could do well with moving those kinds of funds into the consolidated fund because similarly, just as happened in the year before, last year as well, with 4,000 people receiving certificates of naturalization, we saw an amount that came into the Treasury, and we suspect another amount stayed outside of the Treasury through this so-called housing program. And I just want to ask, why is government operating massive illegal overruns, while there are hundreds of millions of dollars belonging to the people of Dominica deliberately being kept outside of the consolidated fund? And we need to be careful in this Honorable House with contingency spending, because we come here and we set ourselves up to pay for things that we don't have approval for. Mr. Speaker, in the budget debate just ended, I was promised a response to some observations I made about head D30, Office of the Prime Minister, and what is provided there in terms of the official residence of the Prime Minister. I was called liar, I was called all sorts of names, but all I said was, I'm aware of a cabinet decision which nobody has denied to rent a property at Mount Daniel for $32,000 a month for the Prime Minister. I'm aware of that. Nobody has denied it. So cabinet accepts in this Honorable House that they have agreed to rent a property at Mount Daniel.
Member, we are dealing with the overdraft now.
Yeah, I'm coming to that.
Hold on one
it's
second.
very well an item that could be dealt with, that will have to be paid from overdraft.
Okay, so hold on. We are dealing with the overdraft now. You open now, so for somebody to respond. So I hope you realize what you're doing, eh?
No, Mr. Speaker, they can do what they want, because they do what they want anyway.
No, well, I don't want the
Whenever I
house.
speak in this house, the response is to curse me, to denigrate me, to say all manner of things about me, although I faithfully come to this house and I focus on issues before us. And indeed, the expenditure on the residence, the official residence of the Prime Minister is a matter for this House because, in fact, it has to have parliamentary approval for...
But it was, honorable member, it was distilled in this House in the debate. But the debate passed, so unless you can bring context and relevance to it, to the overdraft.
What I'm saying to you, Mr. Speaker, is very simple, you know. When we do what we've just done here, where we've made no provision in the $22,552,827 that we have approved for head D30 in recurrent expenditure and capital expenditure, there is no provision for the $32,000 per month rent that Cabinet has agreed they're going to pay for the Prime Minister's official residence. All they have provided for here is $387,000 for wages, for operating and maintenance services, for consultancy and services, and for insurance, etc., making the total amount per month $64,300. If you are providing for $32,300 of that amount, but not for $32,000, what are you going to do? Meet the expense monthly by contingency fund warrant? When you know it is not an unforeseen expense, when you know before the financial year started that you're going to have this expense, because nobody disagrees that you're going to rent the house for the Prime Minister $32,000. So what provision have you made in the budget for it? And so when we behave in this way, when we're not full in our disclosure to the Parliament, even when we're seeking approval for funds on important matters, because everybody on the other side agrees the official residence of the Prime Minister is an important matter, I'm simply saying, where have you provided for this $32,000 a month to be spent? Where? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to wind the debate on the motion for the overdraft facility that's before us. And to, first of all, say, in respect to the Marigot situation where the issue of the medicine and the refrigeration, that refrigerator was in fact stolen, Mr. Speaker. This is why we do not have the refrigerator there, and of course we have to replace it. But I'm sure the Member of Parliament will know that it was stolen, and he would have indicated that part of his reporting to the Parliament, that it was stolen, rather than giving the Parliament the impression that they never had one in the first instance. You're talking about a health center, but you will not speak about the new health center that has been just completed in the Marigot Health District. You will speak about everything, but you will not want to speak about the new Marigot Hospital, which the roof was just poured last week, a massive edifice that would comprehensively provide medical care for the people in the Marigot Health District. You won't talk about those things. His style is to bring innuendo into the Parliament, and as if it is similar to a talk show or radio program, a call-in program, and so forth, and making all sorts of accusations and assertions, and et cetera, et cetera. Now, Mr. Speaker, in respect to monies overseas, Mr. Linton, who worked with the government of St. Kitts and Nevis along with former Prime Minister Mr. James, knows how the CBI works. He knows how the CBI works. That there's a process in the remitting of funds to Dominica's account. And from time to time, like every other country that he knows, because he has worked in those countries, whether it's St. Lucia or in the campaign or in St. Kitts, he knows that there's an international challenge where banking is concerned. And sometimes funds are delayed in getting to Dominica, like they are in St. Kitts, like they are in Antigua, like they are in Grenada, and every other country in the world. But no, he wants to give the Parliament and the people of Dominica the impression that the government has snatched away from the people of Dominica those funds. That's the impression he wants to give. So he comes here with PC Mighty PCT. PC Mighty PCT, as if when he's known to be this honest person in his country, and he's here now to speak, and so on, as the Archbishop of the Diocese of St. Lucia. He knows that. And now the issue of an overdraft facility is in the Constitution of Dominica. The Finance and Mission Act is there. It makes provisions for that. This has been part of the process from ever so often, from since we have our independence. And every business person of serious note has access to an overdraft facility. There are private citizens who have access to overdraft facilities. And in respect to a country, today you will project you're going to raise, say, $10 million from the customs, but you only raise 7. You may say you're going to raise 12 from the Inland Revenue Department, but people may not have paid the taxes as you would have expected them to, and you raise 6. So 6 plus 7 is 13, but you owe $23 million commitment at that period. Whether it's salaries, whether it's debt, whether it's interest payments, you have this. And so you go in there on a temporary basis with the overdraft facility, and you borrow the money so that you can meet your commitments. And so in terms of your respecting agreements that you have, whether it's for the payment of people's labor that they have provided to the government, the public service, or in respect to loan agreements that you have to make those payments. For example, if you do not make your payments to as any country you borrow from the World Bank or the IMF, you don't pay this, then they automatically come in and place you into a particular circumstance. And the fact is, Mr. Speaker, the fact that we have been able to meet our international obligations where debt and interest payments are concerned, including, Mr. Speaker, including the payment into the sinking fund. The 19% interest rate that the United States went to Trinidad to borrow from, Mr. Speaker, we continue to pay for that. The sinking fund, 20 years later, Roosevelt Skerritt has to find money to pay into the sinking fund. Where was this money, Mr. Linton? How did the Workers' Party spend this money? They got over $100 million. $150 million, how did they spend it? At a time when public officers were not getting paid on time, 14 and 15 days after the month, no salary, computer breakdown. That you guys did not pay into the Social Security, monies that you collected from the people, contrary to law. That we defaulted on loans. That the CDB refused to give Dominica any more money. That the World Bank was not giving us any money because of the recklessness of the administration of the Workers' Party at the time. And so this is the thing that we have to deal with. On top of tropical Ophelia, on top of tropical Storm Erica, on top of Maria, on top of COVID-19, on top of the financial crisis that lasted from 2008 to 2015. This is what we have to deal with, and even pay your salary for not working. These are things that we have to do with it. And so, Mr. Speaker, you will see that this government has had a near perfect track record of amortizing the overdraft at the end of the financial year. But with all of these external shocks, including natural disasters, where the normal reaction of any government would have been to send people home, don't pay your debt, dramatically cut on social safety net programs, cut on the public sector investment program, don't fix people's homes, and you stick within your circumstance. But no, this government continues to reach out to people. That's what And then when at the record show that we always amortize the overdraft facility. And when in the one or two occasions in recent time that we have gone over the overdraft, we translate into a loan, which is what previous governments have done. Because it is cheaper to take a loan than to have to pay overdraft on a daily rate. And that's why it is so, and it is purely within law to do that. Because the Minister of Finance under the law, under the Loans Act, can in fact borrow and then let us seek parliamentary approval. And we have done so judiciously and religiously every year we come to the parliament. When we came into office in 2000, there were millions, tens of millions of dollars of loans that were taken by the Workers' Party that were not recorded in the government numbers. Tens of millions of dollars. So you come here and stand up like that, and and the government, this and that and so on. It is this level of dishonesty. Which billions are you talking about? You well want something there yourself there. You want from it? You want from it? Yeah, I see. Okay, yes. So, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I mean, this is what it is. This is what it is, Mr. Speaker. These people come here and they want to give. It's always a negative. You understand what I'm saying? And an effort to mislead people. So, Mr. Speaker, we have been and continue to be within the law when overdraft is concerned. And in the instance where we have gone above, that has been translated into a loan. Into a loan. Into a loan. And this is what we're doing here. We're seeking parliamentary approval because the crafters of the Constitution and the Finance Administration Act of Dominica recognize that the state is not a rock, that the state must be given certain flexibilities to deal with particular issues. And that's what it is. This is not, this guy is speaking as if, well, it is a Roosevelt invention of overdraft facility. That the first time we just talked about overdraft is when I became Minister of Finance, Prime Minister. I am happy to say to you that this is not the case, Mr. Linton, if you do not know. It's always been the case. And this government, this Labour Party administration, has a stellar track record in respect to the management of the state finances. People can come and make all sorts of accusations and innuendos. All sorts of accusations. But when the European Union comes to do their audit, they give us 100% for the management and accountability of the funds given to them. When the World Bank comes, even when they had this issue of the farmers' money after Hurricane Maria, when there were reports of people saying they didn't get, and they should have gotten and they didn't get enough, and they came to do their audit, independent audit, Mr. Speaker, flying colors. Flying colors. The Caribbean Development Bank, we cultivated a relationship with them to the point where they started lending to the government and lending to the aid bank, something they had stopped doing under the workers' government. As a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, the World Bank itself had stopped giving us money. The European Union itself had suspended giving us money over the Caribbean Territory water project, where there was no tender done. The chairman of the board got the contract and messed up the water system, and when we came into government, we spent another $12 million to fix the Carnago water supply. That's what we're talking about. And so, Mr. Speaker, we have a track record, and even when, and they talk about all sorts of things. I remember the Public Accounts Committee, chaired by Mr. James, was looking at the public support program, investigating it, making all sorts of innuendos in the parliament on the political platform. There were hearings. They called the director of audit, the secretary of the cabinet, the financial secretary, and the staff who were working
in the operations of the public support program that is now the Rapid Response Agency. And they went through every single document, spent days questioning the public officers about the management of the public support program. And what did they find out? What did they find out? They found nothing wrong whatsoever, nothing untoward, nothing untoward. Go and read the report, nothing untoward about the public support program. Everything, you could account for every single dollar. And every single dollar we spend on the people of Dominica, you can see it. You can see it, Mr. Speaker. So you can come with your innuendos and your accusations. That's what you're known for. You're not known to be a builder. You're not known to be anybody of a positive mind, of positive thinking, of positive actions. And so, Mr. Speaker, but no problem. But let me respond. So when I'm responding, you see that, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Luge, you are asking the Honorable Prime Minister to respond. While he's responding, you are disturbing him.
His leader spoke for 40 minutes, I said nothing. I am responding, and they're getting vexed. I should not be the one who should be vexed. I should be the one who's vexed. My friend, if you and you guys are not in jail yet, who can go to jail? Who can go to jail? Who can go to jail? Wait. You. So, Mr. Speaker, you see, you're responding and they're getting vexed. My brother, if it's facts you want, then take the facts. Take the facts. The same thing Mr. Linton came here and said that there's no fridge to put the insulin. And when he knows that the fridge was stolen by some people, he may very well know who stole it. You see what I'm saying? But that's what I'm saying, Mr. Speaker. And so, Mr. Speaker, so in respect to the points raised there, we have a clear, transparent, and honest response to those points. And they're not interested in facts. They're not interested in truth, Mr. Speaker. They're not interested in those things. And so he wants to rehash the debate of the budget. Rehash it. You could have asked for division and say you're not supporting the budget. You could have done so. But no. So, Mr. Speaker, I support this stuff. And as I say again, Mr. Linton, that we shall manage the overdraft in a judicious manner, in a prudent manner, in a responsible manner, and we will be able to account for every single dollar that comes out of the overdraft facility used by the government to meet its day-to-day expenses and costs, Mr. Speaker. We can do so, and we have always done so. Always done so, Mr. Speaker, and we shall do so. And so I have the greatest of respect, Mr. Speaker, for the public servants who have to deal with the administration of these measures, Mr. Speaker. We have public servants there who are respectful, professional, technical people, Mr. Speaker. And they have been able to deliver these things in accordance with the law. And I stand by the actions, Mr. Speaker, of the government in respect to overdraft and how we want to manage the finances of this country. And for a country, Mr. Speaker, in response to Mr. Linton, for a country that has been hit by so many disasters and still maintain the levels of expenditure to ensure that people benefit. The NEP, which they said so many things about, and then they come here. They criticize the government for helping people in their homes. They criticize the government for giving people homes. They said handout. They criticize the government for giving people health food for the public support program for medical interventions. You see? But they will not, they criticize it, and then they would forward this one person who they may have heard. They don't know for a fact. Who they may have heard who hasn't gotten help yet. Not asking the person, well, why have you not gotten help yet? Yes, there are people who get help, and that's why the government is pressing on. That's why the government is continuing to work hard to ensure that anybody who has not been captured will be captured. That's what we're doing. The question is, What are you guys' contributions? What are your contributions? Up to now, we can't get the fertilizer from the Polisario here, Dominica, Mr. Speaker. Or you can't, up to now. Oh, you guys can talk about that house, boy. You want to come for lunch, you, Mr. Linton? You want to come for lunch? You want to come for lunch? Yeah, that's all right. That's all right. You want to come? You want to come? Yeah. So, Danny. No problem. Anytime. You can question it anytime. But clearly, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, clearly, you can see these guys, their intention is to mislead the people, misinform the people, and when you give them the response, they want to disturb you, Mr. Speaker. But Mr. Speaker, this is my response to this, and I fully support the measure. This is a perennial request before the Parliament, and every government has asked for it all our existence, Mr. Speaker. And as I mentioned again, I will maintain that it is expensive, and the one time that we've gone over, we've translated this into a loan so that we maintain the integrity of the process and we ensure that we find value for money in terms of the overdraft facility as opposed to a loan at 4%. And I want to say thanks to the National Bank, because the National Bank knows that the records will show that this government, notwithstanding its majority shareholdership in the bank, has always respected the integrity of the National Bank. You can't say that to the Workers' Party, Mr. Speaker. You can't say that. Understand? And we have ensured that we facilitated and assisted the National Bank in maintaining its fiduciary responsibilities to the central bank and also to its shareholders, Mr. Speaker. And this government is known for that. This government is known for that. But I want to thank the National Bank for their cooperation and the other financial institutions that are working with us in respect to, from time to time, when government may need financing. And it is good for the economy in a different way, because money in the bank is people's money. And if the money is used, people get interest and dividends are paid. So the money sitting in the bank, Mr. Speaker, any financial institution is of no value to the shareholders or the depositors, because it's not making money for you. But if it is used, and so it may be even better for us sometimes to borrow from our local institutions than to borrow overseas, because the money will be here, circulating in the economy, creating wealth for the local people. And that our foreign exchange won't have to go out in such dramatic manner sometimes. Because when you take loans, you have to pay these institutions in their currency, whether it's euro or pounds or US. And there's a fluctuating rate on the international market. I see my constituent watching me, telling me, scared right, you know, I see he watching me there attentively. I say, you know, I get scared that if I can't say too much in the Parliament, Mr. Speaker. I always need help, you know. I always need help, my brother. Oh, trust me. Mr. Speaker, thank you very much.
So this concludes the debate on the motion. I will now put the question. Be it resolved that in accordance with Section 3.1 of the Loans Act, Chapter 6405 of the 1990 revised laws of the Commonwealth of Dominica, this Honorable House authorizes the Minister for Finance to borrow and guarantee by means of fluctuating overdraft a sum not exceeding in the aggregate 61,500,000 That's Eastern Caribbean dollars. From A, First Caribbean International Bank, B, National Bank of Dominica, C, Royal Bank of Canada, and or D, any other approved financial institution to meet the central government's current overdraft requirements to guarantee overdraft to statutory and public corporations for a further period of 1 year commencing first day of July 2020. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, authorization for credit facility from the National Bank of Dominica Limited for the purpose of consolidating an existing facility with an amount for bridging finance for general operations. Whereas by virtue of Section 3.1 of the Loans Act, Chapter 6405 of the 1990 revised laws of the Commonwealth of Dominica, amended by Section 4 of the Loans Act Number 4 of 1996, the House of Assembly may by resolution duly passed authorize the minister responsible for finance to borrow money from approved sources for the purpose of financing general development purposes or other purposes. And whereas the occurrences of natural disasters continue to negatively affect economic activity in Dominica, and in particular Hurricane Maria, which caused damage amounting to 226% of GDP in 2017. And whereas these events have resulted in lower than expected revenues, while government has had to increase expenditure to restore livelihoods and infrastructure and continue to provide public services. And whereas since February 2020, government has had to put the necessary infrastructure, human resource and systems in place to mitigate against the spread of the COVID-19 disease. And whereas a sum not exceeding 125 million Eastern Caribbean dollars is required to provide bridging finance for general operations, including rehabilitation expenses and COVID-19 pandemic response measures. And whereas the government of the Commonwealth of Dominica and the National Bank of Dominica Limited have agreed to enter into an agreement whereby the government of the Commonwealth of Dominica will contract a loan in the sum of 125 million Eastern Caribbean dollars. Be it resolved that in accordance with Section 3.1 of the Loans Act, Chapter 6405 of the 1990 revised laws of the Commonwealth of Dominica, amended by Section 4 of the Loans Act Number 4 of 1996, this Honorable House authorizes the Minister responsible for finance to borrow a sum not exceeding the amount of 125 million Eastern Caribbean dollars from the National Bank of Dominica Limited on the following terms: loan amount, $125 million, interest rate, 4%, repayment, 20 years, moratorium on principal and interest repayments during the first 24 months. Second.
Did Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, the resolution before this Honorable House seeks Parliament's approval to borrow from the National Bank of Dominica an amount of 125 million. This amount includes 750,000 in respect of non-performing loans of the Public Works Corporation, and the amount of 250 million hived off the overdraft balance on the Government of Dominica main account. Section 3.1 of the Loans Act, Chapter 6405 of the 1990 revised laws of the Commonwealth of Dominica authorizes the minister with responsibility for finance to A, borrow money or guarantee loans from approved sources, or guarantee loans to statutory corporations on behalf of the government for the purpose of financing general development or for other purposes by resolution passed in Parliament. Mr. Speaker, government has over the years prided itself on managing the country's finances in the most prudent and responsible manner. We have sought diverse ways of raising revenue and at the same time paying very close attention to expenditure. This has happened amidst several domestic economic shocks, be it as a result of weather events, global economic downturns, or more recently, a pandemic. Over the last 10 years, these shocks have occurred every 2 years, each time eroding much of the gains we would have made towards our sustainable development. Mr. Speaker, we as a government and a people have weathered these shocks with the support of many partners who have provided technical assistance, grants, and concessional loans. However, notwithstanding their best efforts, their generosity has only been able to take us thus far, with government having to find the additional resources to meet the fallout of these shocks, including for restoration works and providing for the vulnerable. Mr. Speaker, we were all very happy when we went through the 2018 and 2019 hurricane season unscathed. We were very happy that we could continue to move forward with our restoration and development program following the ravages of Hurricane Maria. Therefore, this government continued in calendar year 2019 into 2020, just as we had done in 2018, repairing roads, restoring bridges, and repairing and building homes. All of these activities, though very costly, were deemed necessary and had to be addressed in a timely manner in order to protect lives, livelihoods, and properties, ultimately building the resilience of our people, our economy, and country. Halting the restoration program has never been an option, and in fact, government has been given credit by international institutions for expediting this program in an efficient and sustainable manner, thereby resulting in much quicker economic rebound than anticipated. But the rehabilitation has come with a high price tag. Mr. Speaker, with our limited resources, government was forced to find other funds to continue restoration activities. Therefore, the options available to the government were loans and/or taxes. However, Mr. Speaker, as a very caring government, we could not, in 2019, just 2 years after the Category 5 Maria, impose additional taxes on a population who was still recovering and trying to put their lives back together. As a result, the best available option to the government was to temporarily exceed the overdraft balance at the National Bank. It was expected that this excess would have been repaid in a few months, with projected strong revenues performance emanating from the forecasted growth in the economy and the completion of negotiations with development partners. In respect to the latter, we are very close to completing the discussions with the OPEC Fund, Caribbean Development Bank, and the World Bank. Mr. Speaker, the onset of COVID-19 pandemic has also affected our financing plan. As already indicated to this Honorable House, the near total shutdown of our economy caused a sharp decline in revenues, with government having to incur new expenditure to put in place the facilities and systems to care for patients and mitigate against the spread of the disease. Government had to quickly retrofit a facility into a hospital. We had to equip it, staff it, and put in place the necessary accommodation for the staff. We had to meet the cost of the Cuban health team, plus the costly operation of the quarantine facilities. Further, with a 43% decline in tax revenue between January to April 2020, when compared to January 2019 to April 2019, and lower revenues than immediately after Maria, government was forced to rely on what was a reasonable excess overdraft balance to a balance that is least expected in order to ensure social and economic stability. Notwithstanding the decline in our country's finances, government did not send one public officer home or cut their salaries. All of the individuals engaged under the NEP were retained. All pensions, wages, and salaries were paid on time. All the social services were provided and grants were paid. We continue to provide support for the repair of houses, since families still require roofs over their heads and to clear drains and waterways before the hurricane season. Mr. Speaker, as a result of all what was just mentioned, this government, like many other governments in the region and across the world, had to rely largely on financing recurrent expenditure through the overdraft facility during this challenging and uncertain time. Fortunately for us, our financing plan was sufficiently well structured that we are able to adjust and to respond to the needs of the country. We are encouraged by the signs of a rebound since the full reopening of the domestic economy. However, we must be mindful how quickly things could change if there is an outbreak of the disease here in Dominica. I urge all Dominicans, including those returning home now, to take all the necessary precautions and adopt and adhere to all the protocols that will ensure that the coronavirus remains under control. In respect of the debt owed to National Bank by the Public Works Corporation, government is expected to guarantee the borrowing of statutory corporations. In that regard, 2 loans and 3 overdraft facilities totaling $6,428,450 were approved for the Public Works Corporation to purchase an asphalt plant, order equipment, and to provide working capital. These facilities were not being financed by the Public Works Corporation as was expected, and were recorded as non-performing assets of the National Bank of Dominica. NBD could consider writing off the balance owed by Public Works Corporation. However, this would affect the profitability of the bank and could result in a fallout to shareholders, since Public Works Corporation is an entity of the government. Additionally, the NBD must pursue an action that would be in compliance with the rules of the current international accounting standards. The prudent action is for the loan to be serviced by the government as the guarantor. Therefore, government has received approval from the NBD to convert the excess on the overdraft facility along with the non-performing debt of Public Works Corporation to a loan. This loan has been evaluated in the context of government's medium-term debt strategy and is consistent with the objectives of this strategy. Further, Mr. Speaker, this loan has not affected the ability of the NBD to provide financing to the private sector. And given this government's track record in servicing its debt, this facility will undoubtedly boost the earnings of the bank. The terms of the loan being contracted, Mr. Speaker, are as follows. Loan amount, 125 million Eastern Caribbean dollars. Interest rate, 4%. Repayment period, 20 years. Moratorium on principal and interest repayments during the first 24 months. Mr. Speaker, I expect that the entire House will give support to this request and as such, commend the resolution to this Honorable House for approval. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The motion is before the House for debate.
Mr. Speaker, this authorization for loan from the National Bank of Dominica Limited for the purpose of consolidating an existing facility with an amount for bridging finance for general operations is the conversion of the $125 million of the overdraft that the government took at National Bank without parliamentary approval into a long-term debt. And I'm wondering, when the Parliament approves today this amount for $125 million, what amount of money can we go to National Bank tomorrow and get from that? Not one red cent. Why? Because the money has already been loaned. You have already borrowed the money. You have used it. You have used it without parliament. You have borrowed it without parliamentary approval. You have used it, and you're coming now after the fact for the approval from Parliament for what is essentially not a loan, but a loan classification correction. You're correcting the classification of a loan. It's no longer overdraft. It's now long-term debt, but you have the money and you spent the money a long time. Mr. Speaker, page 8 of the estimates. Page 8 of the estimates. If we go all the way down, maybe 32 lines, you will see an amount there under actual disbursed outstanding debt, June 30th, 2019. You will see National Bank of Dominica, 30 million. And in the other column, projected disbursed outstanding debts at July 1st, 2020, which is the beginning of this financial year, $154,034,165. That's the $125 million loan right there. That's it right there. And then you have the overdraft facility, two lines down from that, $140,039,191, down to 56 million. 140 was the start of the year. During the year, it went up to 181, and then it came back down end of the year to 50 because we're doing this correction. So we mustn't fool ourselves. It's not a loan. We are consolidating, so we're effectively making a loan classification correction. That's what we're doing. We're saying we have the money already. It was in overdraft. Please, bank, we'll pay you back as though it's a long-term loan we took. We have the money already. We've already taken the money. We're pretending as though it's new money we're getting to do something. And we're talking about the occurrences of natural disasters continue to negatively impact Dominica and COVID-19, etc., etc. Mr. Speaker, for the record, this loan amount has nothing to do and will have nothing to do with COVID-19. The amount was received and spent long before we knew there was ever going to be anything like COVID-19 in Dominica. And we need to be clear on that. And I heard some comments from the Minister of Finance about the relationship with the bank and how sound it is. We hope it is sound, and we hope that in the lending practices that the government imposes on the bank, because it's in a position to impose. I heard the Prime Minister talking about majority shareholding. There was one time what we used to call our Crapo Bank, Bank Numem, founded by Vic Rivera back in the 1970s.
Bank Numem. Translate.
Our bank self. Our bank self, Mr. Speaker, Bank Numem, Crapo Bank. It was under the National Bank Act. We repealed the National Bank Act so that the financial institution known as National Bank could come under the General Banking Act of Dominica. And at that point, back in the day, the government was persuaded to pull back from its majority 51% shareholding to hold something on the order of 48.9%. But when you put that 48.9% with the Social Security shareholding, which the government is technically in control of, the government basically is in control of NBD. The government puts whoever it wants to put on the board of NBD. The government is in a position to crowd out minority shareholders and so on. And basically, with whoever it wants on the board of the bank, get what it wants from the bank. So, Mr. Speaker, this loan at 4% with a 2-year moratorium on interest, with a 2-year moratorium on principal and interest, is going to result in interest forgone on the order of $10 million. The bank will make over 20 years from the government $56.7 million in interest over the 20 years. But if that same money, that same $125 million was in the bank's mortgage portfolio, it would have made $43.1 million more in interest. If it was in the bank's consumer loans portfolio, it would have made $88 million more over the 20-year period. So when we talk about government facilitating and throwing back money in the economy and so on, we need to consider opportunity cost and opportunity lost as well for the bank when significant sums of the bank's deposits are being loaned to a government. The government must understand that it holds for on behalf of the people of Dominica, because not all your money, 10% of the deposits of the bank as of the end of last financial year. But the other shareholders in the bank have 90% of the deposits. So the whole question of good corporate governance of the bank, to ensure integrity, to ensure independence and so on of the bank from the government, is important to protecting the interest of the depositors in the bank. And I hope the government will remain faithful to that. As Mr. Secretary has indicated, he wants to be faithful to it. That's fine. But I'm just echoing the call that is what is required and that is what is needed. Because on this question of the government putting who it wants on the board of the bank, one last point, Mr. Speaker. Section 97(2)(e), all right, of the Banking Act of 2015 is concerned that fit and proper persons are placed on the board of directors of the bank. And all I will say is to quote 97(2)(e) and to say that the legislation is concerned with whether the person is a significant shareholder, director, or officer, or holds any position of authority in any licensed financial institution, locally or elsewhere, whose license has been suspended or revoked, otherwise than as a result of amalgamation or voluntary liquidation, which has been or is being wound up or compulsorily liquidated. Check your membership on the board, check who you put in there, and see whether you're in compliance with the good governance requirements of the bank. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I intend to make just a brief contribution, Lord, Mr. Speaker. This loan amount of $125 million, Mr. Speaker, of which $750,000 will be used for non-performing loans to the Public Works Corporation. I'm very concerned about that, Mr. Speaker, because it is my fear that the Public Works Corporation will continue to perform badly if they cannot get jobs to do in their own country. And we are talking about Dominican skilled men. For more than 50 years, the Public Works Corporation have been operating smoothly. If you look at the site where they just moved from, down in the Fokolo area, and I noticed they've been put out of sight, hopefully not out of mind. Because we had, and I mentioned it in the budget debate, a sterling example of how local talent could be sidelined when Public Works Corporation was engaged to do the intersection of the KFC area. And then after the heavy equipment was moved on site, we noticed that another company, I won't mention the company, was engaged. I have my information correct. Yeah, don't get too excited. Okay, you'll get your chance to speak, if you will speak. So I'm saying, in Dominica, we must give our local talent an opportunity to display their skills. We've done it in the past. Why is it we always go to foreign interests when we have jobs that they can do? There was, after Hurricane Maria, there was sufficient for everyone. Yes, I'm not saying that we can't engage foreign, but you have a Public Works Corporation, which is a creature of government, right? A statutory corporation. But if they're not getting jobs to do, what will happen to them? They will be packed in a corner like they have been done. So I'm encouraging this government to engage Public Works. Do not make them feel left out. Do not let their talent go to waste. And if after years of neglect, you will find they will lose their skills, and the skilled people will move to other countries. So I'm encouraging this government to give Public Works Corporation an opportunity so that they do not find themselves in the position where the $750,000 are non-performing loans. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Mr. Speaker, and good afternoon to everyone. I just want to submit a brief intervention and reading through the reasons given, Mr. Speaker, for the loan, and we have seen the impact of disaster and unforeseen events. Looking at the interest rate, which is capped at 4% over a 20-year period, I am just humbly asking whether within the negotiations, we had considered the issuance or the selection of a counter-cyclical loan lending policy, which would help us in the event that we have further disaster or unforeseen events, that the interest rate would be altered, maybe go down to a minimum of 0%, and when the economy is doing better, that the rates can come back up to 4%, by that helping us to balance the impact of unforeseen or severe events on our economy. That's just what I'm doing.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to wind the debate on the motion before the Parliament to borrow a sum of $125 million from the National Bank of Dominica. Let me first of all say, Mr. Speaker, that what we're doing here this afternoon is purely legal and in conformity with the laws of Dominica. It is in absolute conformity with the Loans Act of the Commonwealth of Dominica. The Loans Act, Mr. Speaker, gives the Minister of Finance the power or the authority to borrow from any financial institution and then seek parliamentary approval. It does not say that we must first seek parliamentary approval. It doesn't say that. So the law, that's the law. This law was not brought on when I became the Minister of Finance. It authorizes the Minister of Finance to borrow from any financial institution and then seek parliamentary approval. And the leader must also appreciate that there's a difference between an overdraft facility and a loan. It's a clear difference.
And the practice, Mr. Speaker, of turning an overdraft into a loan is a normal day activity for many entities and individuals. You know, Mr. Speaker, for example, I had the situation myself. So there are businesses that will just translate the overdraft into a loan. And so, Mr. Speaker, there is a difference between an overdraft facility and a loan. So before this was translated into a loan, it was an overdraft. Now that it has been translated into a loan, we now are seeking parliamentary approval for this loan contracted by the Minister of Finance in accordance with the Loans Act of the Commonwealth of Dominica. So what we're doing here is in absolute, undisputed conformity with the laws of Dominica. And so it is disingenuous or dishonest, Mr. Speaker, to say that if you know what we're doing is right, but if you do not know, ask a question. Do not make prejudicial statements, Mr. Speaker. Do not make prejudicial statements, Mr. Speaker. You understand? Do not make prejudicial statements. If you want to know something, if you do not know, then ask a question. We will stand and we will explain to you, Mr. Speaker. But clearly, it is being mischievous on the part of the opposition to give the country the impression that this government is breaking the laws and we come in here and so forth and so forth. This is not nice. It is bad. The National Bank used to be called the National Commercial Bank of Dominica. It was changed at the time we decided to sell a significant portion of the government shareholdership. Prior to we at the Monetary Council took a decision, I believe in 2005 thereabout, to bring in new legislation in respect to banking. Because there were many jurisdictions where there were issues with regards to banking, including here in Dominica during the period 1995, 2000. And the law was further amended to address certain gaps, which we in Dominica had indicated to the central bank. But there was a particular rush to get the legislation in place, especially with regards to the challenges which many banks were experiencing in the jurisdiction. And so there have been amendments to this. The Aid Bank will tell you, DOASCO will tell you, DBS Radio will tell you, the National Bank will tell you, Public Works, all of the state entities, Mr. Speaker. People believe I get involved in the day-to-day operation. I don't get involved in these things, you know. If I hear something, I will bring to their attention. But I never impose, good or bad, I have never in my years as Minister of Finance gotten involved in the operations of these institutions. If I know that they're doing something that they're not doing, and in some cases I have told them things that if they listen to me, they will not be in some problems, some of these public corporations. But I don't get involved. I don't tell them who to give loans and who don't give loans. That used to be the practice in our country before I became Minister of Finance. You can tell that the managing director at the National Bank can tell you. The board of directors can tell you. Aid Bank can tell you. I don't get involved in the operations of these things. I allow people on the board to do what they have to do within the law. Within the law. And I allow the operations to do. And I have an unenviable track record in that regard. Now, the issue of, and I think the conversion, Mr. Speaker, of the overdraft to loan is a prudent thing. It's a responsible action. Because what it's ultimately doing is that it is saving the Treasury money. And they spoke about, Mr. Linton and Little person spoke about if the bank had borrowed mortgages, it will be X amount, and so forth. But when a bank is engaging itself in lending, it must also be mindful of the risk. What is the risk factor? Especially with a government that has dutifully maintained its payments to the National Bank and to other international regional financial institutions. Mr. Speaker, when we go on the regional security system, our offerings always oversubscribed. Always oversubscribed, Mr. Speaker, and we have gotten the lowest interest rate in the Monetary Council, Monetary Union. Because when we go and we float bonds out there and we sell treasury bills, Mr. Speaker, and we say the 90-day, when the 90-day comes, we pay everybody who we owe. And the word gets around. We present to them our full books, our whole prospectus of the government's finances is presented to potential investors. I have had the occasion to go to various islands to promote government treasury bills. And the interest and the commendation which we receive. People talking about transparent, they could get all the information they needed. They did not ask us any other additional questions because they had enough information to make a decision on the investment in our treasury bills. And I'm not here to tell the nation that this government is perfect and so forth, and we're doing everything is perfect. And so, no, we're not saying that. What I'm saying to the nation is that notwithstanding the challenges and the temptations to be indifferent, we have tried and we have stayed the course and maintained strong fiscal policies. We're not wavering on the fiscal policies. This is why, Mr. Speaker, the international financial institutions will come to our aid and lend us money. Because they know, notwithstanding the country's fiscal challenges now, as a result of the external shocks, that the records of the government shows that it is a responsible and prudent government. Mr. Speaker, we can, here the FSC and myself, we can negotiate loans by telephone with these international financial institutions. Because this country, this government has integrity. It is respected, Mr. Speaker. Its character can stand the test of scrutiny. And on that basis, people lend us money. After Hurricane Maria, when I went to negotiate with the World Bank in Washington, Mr. Speaker, I went in October. Hurricane hit us on the 17th, right? 17th of September. We paid the World Bank, Mr. Speaker, at the end of September of 2018. Because at the end of September, a payment was due. Most governments would have said, hurricane hit us, we're not paying nobody. And even when we could have made a case, a successful one that is, for debt forgiveness, or the deferment of payments of loans and interest payments, we never asked after Hurricane Maria. We never asked after Erica, one person to forgive our debt. And we never asked for one debt deferment, Mr. Speaker. We paid our debt on time. And that is in the midst of a challenge. In the midst of a challenge. To do so speaks to the profoundness of the responsibility and the prudent management of the finances of this country. It has a core, Mr. Speaker. At the core, Mr. Speaker, the problem is, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, that is what it is, Mr. Speaker. And so, coming to the issue of the Public Works Corporation, there is no government, Mr. Speaker, who has provided the kind of support to the Public Works Corporation than this Labour Party government. The Public Works Corporation, Mr. Speaker, you know they had a large group of people who were seasonal. So they used them for a period of time. And when the rainy season comes, because you're not going to do no road patching during hurricane season, rainy season, they send you home. When Mr. Blackmore was the Minister for Public Works, we took a decision on a compassionate nature to keep all of the employees full-time. Full-time. And the records will show, Mr. Speaker, that we have provided significant contracts to the Public Works Corporation over those years, Mr. Speaker. Significant contracts to them, Mr. Speaker. And I want to commend the acting manager there, Miss or Mrs. John, who I believe has been doing a very good job in managing the affairs of the Public Works Corporation. And since she came on there, we have seen an improvement in the management of the funds and greater accountability of the funds, Mr. Speaker. So I commend the public for that. In terms of local contractors, majority of projects are done by local contractors or subcontractors. The fact remains, Mr. Speaker, there are international tender processes, and that's what happens sometimes. And these international tenders require a bond, a financial bond. You must have a resume or a CV of projects that you have done with particular financial contractual amounts. And as a result of this government's investments in local contractors, because before we came into government, Mr. Speaker, there was no local contractor who could tender for a CDB project, or for an EU project, or for a World Bank project, Mr. Speaker. And because this government has empowered local contractors, they are now able, some of them are now able to tender for CDB projects, for World Bank projects, and for EU projects, Mr. Speaker, because we empower them. Now they have a CV, a resume of projects. Yes, for example, came on board when Mr. Tony Blair was employed at the Doha School when I became Prime Minister, or when we came into office. His company was formed under my watch as Prime Minister. And now he's a multi-millionaire. And what I used to do with these guys, for example, I remember once we had several water projects doing across the country. And I called all these local contractors, and I split one project in two. One do the water tank and the pipes from the intake, and the others do the distribution lines. And there's some people who become greedy. We have now Mr. Stuko. I remember once I was minister as Prime Minister already, I believe. There was a tender for the Northeast Comprehensive School, the auditorium. A Trinidadian firm won the tender, the bid. And I stood up and I said, no, give it to Stuko. But when you do those things, it is fine. And then when they don't get it, they say, well, we handle contracts to people. Man, if you want to give a story, then give the full story. Don't give half of it or part of it that will make you look good and make the other person look bad. You understand? The health centers, a local contractor, and we're looking for contractors. The one from Newtown, I'm opening a local person. One from Soufriere, one from Mkolio. We and the housing, we are looking at it differently to ensure that more people are engaged. But there are significant numbers of subcontractors. All the electricians, all the tilemen, all the plumbers are Dominicans. Who are building their CVs, being able to get contracts of particular size that they can manage, to be able to mushroom into medium-sized contractors and be able to now have the world as the marketplace rather than just Dominica. That's what we're doing. On all of the CBI projects, there is a local supervisor, engineer, or quantity surveyor, and they're all Dominicans, engaged by us. Some are UWP, some are Labour Party supporters. Mr. Parrish now is working on the Anichi. He has gotten a major contract there. Ace Engineering worked on the Bellevue Chauffeur project. He did the water component and the road component. And there was another local contractor who got some aspects of it as well. I mean, and Mr. Speaker, and you have a local Dominican, a guy who was living in St. Thomas, who, having heard of all these projects coming on, he left St. Thomas and came to Dominica and set up a steel bending operations. Jungle Bay, Mr. Speaker, all are local people along there, local artisans. The guy who got the major contract to put the stonework at the Kempinski, local Dominican, all the stonework you see at the Kempinski Hotel. As a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, they were so impressed with his quality of work that they ended up using more stone than they originally, the plans that originally envisaged. Tranquility, Mr. Speaker. All local people, Mr. Speaker, local people, tranquility. The Kempinski, all the concrete came from a local business owner. The tranquility in Salisbury, a local person providing all of the concrete. The hospital, we're buying all of the sand and the stones and the cement from Dominica. The housing, Mr. Speaker, outside or maybe toilet bowls and sinks and so forth, we buy all of the material locally. All. Local trucks, local artisans. As a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, we're looking for people to work. We're looking for people to work. Because there are jobs. And so we continue to invest in local contractors. But you see, they're not making no case for no local contractors, you know. They're making a case for one or two of their friends. But the friends they're making a case for do have contracts, but they're not telling them. And I know why they're not telling them, Mr. Speaker. But I can't say it in the parliament, you tell me withdraw. They're not telling them. All of it. Local contractors. Boye, Mr. Loader, is the one hauling all of the housing components under the Sustainable Housing Project. I know Mr. Loader, he doesn't support me. But the man is Dominican. He has the equipment. And when I mean, the list goes on, Mr. Speaker. I don't want to call people name in the parliament and so forth. I mean, that's not the purpose of it. I don't want to put anybody on notice or anything. But I believe I have a duty and an obligation to respond to an accusation that is false. And I have an obligation to identify and cite facts. So they make the statements without citing any facts. And they run. The two most senior members of the parliament, leaving the four least experienced people in the parliament at their own devices. But I know they're there and they're watching me and they're learning one or two things, Mr. Speaker, which is good. So they'll be more enriched today than they have been otherwise, because they get no tutelage, no guidance from the leadership. That's a problem. And so they want to give a thing and nothing happening and so on and so on. This is why I said to Mr. Linton, if you say the government taking money from overdraft illegally, then you must ask the clerk of the house, boy, where government getting money from? Overdraft?
how they pay my salary. And if they pay your salary with money that you think they got illegally, then don't take the salary. Don't take the salary. Because what you call conveyance, AG, in law? There's a major charge for that. As a matter of fact, a bigger charge, AG. You got your gratuity for not working. You get your gratuity for not working. You didn't ask, why is that overdraft money that the other boy, like, why you don't want that money, you know, boy. Overdraft money, scary check there and so on. And you get parliamentary approval, that's illegal, I don't want it. But you take your gratuity money and you run with it, and then you come and say, boy, where did you get money from, boy? Overdraft, all you take money to do these things? You know, it's like people who buy agricultural produce from people they know who are not farmers, Mr. Speaker. And while they collecting them away, anything for the person, they say, where you get that from, boy? You show them something you steal, boy. I know you don't have a farm, you know, but they still take it and they pay them money. That is Mr. Linton, Mr. Speaker, based on what he said here in the Parliament. So, I believe, Mr. Speaker, finally, I believe that, and you know, Danny, I'll call him Danny because he will add his capacity, private capacity. But his member was enough.
Yeah, you need to say that.
When he talk about taking jail, Mr. Speaker, he should tell the Parliament why was he released from DAPEX by a chairman of the board who was a Porto UWP and a general manager who was a Porto UWP. Why would they have fired you as a senator, your sitting senator at the time? I fire you as an employee. What did you do there? What did you do there? You know, Mr. Speaker, I keep telling people I'm a blessed fellow, you know. The Lord walks with me, you know. I walk by, we're talking along. And I have seen many things that people ask to happen to me, happen to them. People need to ask themselves, Mr. Speaker, and understand how things work in this world. That's all. This is why I am not fearful of anything people say or do, because I don't have to respond to people. I have the backing of the Lord, Mr. Speaker. And so let them say what they have to say. People have asked for me to die and get sick and this and that, and I just pray to you, Lord. You know, and I say, Father, forgive them for they know what they're doing or saying. But as it says, is written in the Bible, when you give to the poor, you give unto the Lord, and there's a debt. It could also be interpreted that if you touch or attempt to touch the Son of Jesus Christ in the name of Roosevelt Skerritt, then he has a responsibility to protect his very own. And that's what he is doing. So they'll try all kinds of things, Mr. Speaker. All kinds of things. This is why I keep standing, and this is why I will keep standing, Mr. Speaker. Because vengeance is not mine. Vengeance is the Lord's. And that's why I leave everything to the Lord, my friend. So let them go ahead and to propagate and to promote a hate against Roosevelt Skerritt. All I've done to this guy is good. And because they want to get to the position that I am in, they figure the best way to go about it is to try to kill me in one way or the other. But I didn't put myself there. The Lord used the voters of Dominica to place me there.
And when the Lord would decide that I have had enough and so forth, and he said me, well done, good and faithful servant, and so on, go and get some rest, go by the bay in O2 and O Park and break some coconuts and walk and so forth, and enjoy your little gardening and go in the backyard and take two eggs and fry and a little cucumber and grate it and a little, passion fruit and make your juice and relax yourself and so on with no stress and so on, then I'll respond. I'll respond. But until such time, Mr. Speaker, they can try whatever they want. Unless the Lord decides to take me out. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. And anybody who attempts otherwise will suffer the consequences of the wrath of Jesus Christ. Amen. It's simple as that. Amen. Mr. Speaker, I do not want to start preaching so early in my career and so on. But I felt it necessary to make this point to people, especially churchgoers. I don't know, sometimes you go to church and they read the Bible upside down and they're engaged. The Lord tells you must pray for the government. Yes, very clear. Doesn't that say, Mr. Master, you're assistant preacher man in the church in Penville? It says pray for the government. It can't tell you to pray for the demise of the government. It tells you to pray for the government. Hold the government up in prayer. So no matter how much church you go, how much Bible you read, if you do not follow these things, it will have no consequence to you. None. And I see the senator is shaking her head. Every time I speak, she's shaking her head in agreement. Because you see, Mr. Speaker, she objected to everything Austria said. And she did not object to anything I said, Mr. Speaker, which tells me that all what I said in this house was the truth, nothing but the truth. Because she was vociferous, adamant to object to Mr. Austri. And she allowed Scary to speak for an hour, making statements, and she sat there and she was like that. Yes, Scary, you're talking truth there. Especially about the Kalinago people there. You're right. You really is the first Prime Minister to really look out for us in the Kalinago territory. You know, and the one I have there calling my leader, I don't think Mr. Love Kalinago at all. So I think the people in Kalinago territory will keep voting for you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
This concludes the debate on the motion. I will now put the question. Be it resolved that in accordance with Section 3.1 of the Loans Act, Chapter 6405 of 1990 Revised Laws of the Commonwealth of Dominica, amended by Section 4 of the Loans Act, Number 4 of 1996, this Honorable House authorizes the Minister responsible for finance to borrow a sum not exceeding the amount of 125 million Eastern Caribbean dollars from the National Bank of Dominica Limited on the following terms. Loan amount, $125 million, interest rate, 4%, repayment, 20 years, moratorium on principal and interest payments during the first 24 months. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. The motion has been passed, approved.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank Dr. King and Honorable Charles for presenting the two motions on my behalf. I appreciate this very much. Get me to rest a little more. Thank you. And having witnessed a formidable debate and presentation by the government side in this House, Mr. Speaker, I move that the House be adjourned sine die.
It has been moved and seconded that the House be adjourned sine die. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. House stands adjourned sine die.